recording. Trying again. You know what? Timeouts. We got to go again. All right, everyone. For this project, we are going to design a box with a lid. So after we have done all of the brainstorming and the planning, now I made my scale drawing half scale, so it was easier to get all the measurements. And while I was at it, since I finished this one, I designed a few other sides patterns just to show you some examples here. So the process that I went through to design this box, which is the one that's in the drawing, was just simply a 2.5 inch total height of white oak and mahogany. Those are the two woods I used here, with a 1 inch stripe of mahogany in the middle, a 3/4 inch stripe of oak on the top and the bottom. Glue those three together using parallel clamps and let them dry overnight. Now, to get the length, to know how much wood I needed for the whole border, the plan showed 6 inches by 6 inches, which means that I need at least 24 inches to go all the way around this box. So I cut a little bit more just to be safe, 25 inches of the oak and of the mahogany. 25 inches of the oak and the mahogany, glued those three together in parallel clamps and let those dry overnight. For the other designs, the oak and mahogany stripes on this one, each one was just a 1/2 inch, all glued together, same process. This design had 1 inch oak on the top and the bottom with a 1/2 inch mahogany and oak square pattern in the center. Each one of those was 1 inch long. And the last design was just some triangles, the same dimensions as this design with the 1 inch in the middle, but instead of making it a solid mahogany, it was with the 1 inch triangles with 1 inch triangle, oak triangles alternating in between to get that pattern. If you just did a stripe, those three get glued together, but if you're doing a pattern, like for example, the one with the squares, you glue the end, the last one together, and then glue each individual piece in between those two 25 inch long oak pieces with the parallel clamp. And as you glue all the way down, keeping it really tight with no gaps, then that parallel clamp squeezes evenly on both sides so you don't have any gaps, and it'll glue nice and flat. Important thing with parallel clamps is that those clamps stay parallel to each other. I'm going to show you how to use those when we glue this project up. And this 5-stripe one, same process, we glue in between with the parallel clamps. So all of those were glued in the parallel clamps, and then that waited overnight. The next day, was able to take those parallel clamps off, and as you can see, they were really rough. There's two ways to flatten out these boards when they are glued. One is using the planer. Now, if all the wood grain is going in the same direction and it's just 3, 4, 5 pieces that are the entire length, no small pieces like in the triangle one or in the checkered one, you could send it through the planer. And the planer uses knives to surface out. We've talked about the planer before. Smooth out the top just to get rid of all the glue, make it all even. But if you have little pieces like this, it's a little safer to use the surface sander right behind me. Using sandpaper, it takes a little bit longer. Little by little, it will sand those layers down to a nice, flat, even surface. And that will be sanded to 80 grit by the time it comes out on the other end. So then you'll be able to see if there's any gaps that have to be repaired, any problems. In my case, I didn't have any of those. I just needed to sand both sides totally flat on all the pieces so that they were prepped and ready to go to the chop saw. Now, before cutting on the chop saw, it's a nice idea to sand the whole board down, maybe to like 150, just to get rid of some of the scratches from the surface sander. While it's one big board, it's a little easier to sand than waiting till after we cut. But then the next step is going to the miter saw, and since these sides were all 6 inches long, 2.5 inches high, 2.5 inches high is good because the miter saw can do that cut. What I can do is I just cut the end of that long board to 45 degrees. And then from that, I can measure 6 inches for the size of the one side, and then use that stop block, set up a stop block at 6 inches so that I can cut the 4 sides out. Now, the last one probably won't be long enough for you to have a safe place for your left hand. So that when you get to the 4th piece, you have to trace one of the other pieces onto that last part and cut that last one without using the stop block. You have to be right on the pencil line to make sure that it's the same size as the box, as the side that's going to be across from it. So this becomes a square and your angles aren't wrong. But with that stop block set up, it was easy enough to cut all of these boxes, since they were all going to be 6 inches, and get all those sides cut out and prepared. The next step is to go to the table saw. We have to cut a rabbet joint, a rabbet cut, in the bottom of the box so that we can put in a piece of masonite on the bottom and not see it. It's hidden behind this bottom edge. There's a 1/4 inch by 1/4 inch rabbet cut out of the bottom there, and that's done on the table saw. Once we select what side is going to be the bottom. So like on this one, making sure all the triangles were facing upward was important, because I decided I wanted to put the triangles pointing upward. I had to make that rabbet cut on the inside of all 4 sides of this pattern. And then I was ready to glue. Wanted to make sure the inside is sanded nicely though before glue. So just like every project, if it's going to be on the inside of the box, we're going to sand that first. So did a little quick sand on the inside parts, not too much to mess up the corners, just on the inside where you would feel and where you would see. So I don't have any burns or tool marks or anything inside the box. And then we're ready to put some glue on. Now gluing these is can be a little bit of a challenge. I like using rubber bands to glue these together, because a rubber band will go around a 6x6 box with some help. So you may need somebody to help you stretch the rubber band, but if you can get it around yourself, but there are some challenges. If the rubber bands break, or they don't, if they, you might mess up the alignment of the box. That's normal, it totally happens. And as you can see, it happens to me. But once you get the rubber bands on there and it's glued nice, then you can just let that dry. There are alternatives. You could use a strap clamp. If you want to, if the rubber bands are just not working for you, that's the way we'll do it. Or if you have a different shape in your project, that's the way we'll do it. But I used rubber bands for this project. 2 rubber bands per box, basically, and let those dry overnight. Making sure, very important step, making sure that the rabbet joint at the bottom is all even with each other. Don't accidentally flip one of these sides over when you glue it. It's happened before, and then we have to break the box, clean up the glue, and then re-glue it again. After that's dry, just a lot of sanding. Got to go the whole outside of it sanded all the way up to 220. Just sanding the top of the box, the outside of the box, a little bit of the inside. If you got any glue in there, clean up any spots you might see that's no good. And then the box frame is pretty much done at that point. Next comes the lid. So in the plan, I had a little bit of an overhang on the lid and these little square legs that I designed just to go basically even with the lid. I thought it looked kind of nice. The wood is, as you can see, it's got to be at least 6.5 inches wide, and none of the boards that we have are already 6.5 inches wide. So those had to be 2 pieces of wood. So we had to make 2 pieces of wood, and you can see on this one what that looked like. So in this case, I designed the lid to be half mahogany, half oak. So 3¼ inch mahogany, 3¼ inch oak, making sure that that seam in between is really smooth and flat when it's cut on the table saw, and then those are glued together. And then run through the surface sander to smooth it out, just like we did the box. The same is true for this solid one. You know, you can't tell from far away that it's 2 pieces of wood, but it is, 1, 2. The same with the mahogany. It's really hard to tell. If you match the wood grain up really well, it's hard to tell that it's 2 pieces of wood, but it is 2 pieces of wood, and it gives it a little bit more stability when it's on the box. So wider boards can warp, so we glue a couple pieces together, makes it a little bit stronger, looks a little nicer. You know, if we glue up a couple pieces together, it might stay flat a little bit better, and you can hardly tell that it's actually 2 pieces of wood. So then once that was dry, the glue for that was dry, run those through the surface sander, get them all flat, and then put whatever detail was designed on there. These have little chamfer angles. This one's just regular squared off, but the one that was originally in the plan that I had drawn was a slight radius, okay? So just this tiny little radius sanded down to become the shape that I wanted. After the lid is all done and cut out, we have to make it fit to the box, and that's this rabbet cut here. So this will be done on the table saw, just cutting this really small rabbet where this interior is exactly the same size as the box. You'll need to measure the thickness of your sides plus whatever you planned for overhang to draw this square in the center so that it matches this size. We know how to set the saw. And that was done on all of them. And since these are all the same, they're actually interchangeable, each of these lids. But got that on there, so this actually fits. It's easy to take on and off, but it doesn't flop around and look ugly. And it gives it a little bit of more detail with this thinner edge on the outside. Once the lid was done, time for the handle. This was the handle that I designed on the plan, just a simple pyramid, kind of flat. But there was also a few others, just while I had the material there as I brainstormed. Basically the same design, but inverted, glued in the center of that one. Small little arch design. This was done on the band saw. So if you designed one with a little arch like this is how we would cut it out. Real simple. And measured, glued right to the middle after the whole lid is sanded. I can't emphasize that enough. These have to be sanded all the way up to 220, really nice, before gluing the handle and before gluing the legs. Otherwise, it's really hard to go back and sand after it's glued already. It's also a good idea to sand the handle and the legs before you glue them individually, like when they're off the project, so that it's a little easier to handle. Hard to sand these legs when they're already glued onto the box. Last step was the legs. These legs were 1/2 inch by 1/2 inch with a 1/4 inch rabbet cut out of it, and then cut to 1.5 inch long, like I had planned on my drawing. In order to get them consistent all the way around, the ones with these legs that are glued on the outside, because you don't want to have a wobble. Like if you glue these crooked, the whole box will wobble. Really easy, just put a piece of wood underneath that is the height you like. You can try multiple different heights, 1/4 inch, 1/2 inch, whatever. You would just find a piece of wood, that's whatever that thickness is. Put the box on top and then glue the legs on, and with a rubber band, hold those legs in place until the glue dries. Really making sure that no glue oozes out on the sides or out of the top. Wipe up any glue that comes out with a wet paper towel so you don't have to worry about it later, because you've already spent all that time sanding this whole side nice and beautiful. Once that's all done, it's just finished sanding and then putting on the polyurethane as we've discussed in class, and then you'll have a completed box with a lid. So I hope that gives you a good idea of the overview of how we're gonna go about building this project. It's time to start brainstorming ideas. I will see you over at that assignment. Let's get started.